Welcome to the Real Estate Show with Christy Brady of Strata Realty Group. Good to have you with us today. And Christy, I understand you have a special guest in the studio.
Yes, I constantly get questions about what a floodplain is, and so I decided to bring in the floodplain manager, Jeremy Draper, to explain it to us. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Christy. Thanks for having me today.
So, Jeremy, what defines a floodplain?
FEMA's come out to the city of Elko, and they've been doing this for the past 30-plus years. And what they did is they studied the rivers and the hydrology of the area and basically figured out where the town's going to flood most. And that's what really starts to define that floodplain. The floodplain is really, it's a 100-year flood event that could potentially flood a property or any other area in the city of Elko.
I see. How much of the city is affected by the floodplain?
Currently, we have about 10% of the city that is affected by the floodplains. And basically, those are properties that are located inside the floodplain that are currently built. And of that, we have about 600 homes. And those properties are located inside the floodplain. And in the case of a 100-year event, those properties would actually be flooded.
So how can homeowners determine if they are in a floodplain?
That's a good question. There's a few simple ways you can do that. One is to actually go onto FEMA's website. The website is MSC. That's mapservicecenter.fema.gov. Put in your address and pull up that map, and it'll tell you what floodplain you're located in. There's different floodplain levels. There's basic A floodplain, an AE floodplain, AO, AH, and each one is a different type of flooding. And there's also a floodplain called a Zone X, and that means it's outside of that 100-year flood zone, but it still has that potential for flooding. Just like we saw last week here in the city of Elko, we had some areas that actually flooded that aren't in the floodplain. So just because you're not in that floodplain, you need to be aware of your surroundings there. Now, if you can't find out on that website, just give me a call, and we can look that up and explain where you're at in that floodplain.
So if someone needed to call you, where would they reach you at?
They can reach me by coming to the city of Elko or by calling me at 777-7217.
So at that point, when is flood insurance required?
Flood insurance is a federally mandated requirement for any home that has a mortgage on it. And what it is most mortgages, as you are aware, are backed by the federal government. And the federal government does require flood insurance for homes located in the flood zone. One thing to remember, though, is 30% of the flood claims for FEMA are actually in homes that are outside of the flood zone. So again, it's just being aware of those surroundings and making sure that you do have that flood insurance on your house.
What determines the cost of my flood insurance?
The cost of your flood insurance is really how your house relates to the flood zone. There's different levels of what's referred to as a base flood elevation. Most floodplains actually have that base flood elevation information. Again, you'll need to contact me for that information and then look at an elevation certificate. Now, an elevation certificate is something that's done by an engineer, a surveyor, or an architect. And they come out, survey your property, look at the finished floor of your building. That finished floor is typically the main level of your building, and see how that relates to the flood zone. If your finished floor is above the flood zone, then you're in good shape. Your flood insurance is actually going to be a little bit cheaper. But if your finished floor is below that floodplain, then you start to see some problems because the insurance adjuster is going to see that and say you have a higher potential for flooding because your finished floor is below that flood level.
Can I change the rating of my insurance?
Again, that goes back to the elevation certificate. And that's really going to be what the insurance adjuster uses for adjusting your insurance. Now, there's been some recent legislation, as recently as 2012, that actually adjusts the insurance rates for everybody inside that flood zone.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for coming in and answering our questions about the floodplain.
Thank you, Christy. And again, if any of your listeners have questions or anybody else out there does have questions, please give me a call at 777-7217 or just stop by the city of Elko. I'll be happy to help you out.
All right, and for more information on Christy Brady and the Real Estate Show, Christy Brady of Strata Realty Group, you can contact her at christysellshomes@gmail.com. That's KRISTIE sellshomes@gmail.com. Or you can go to her website, christyonline.com, or give her a call at 385-7679. And now, back to the Glenn Beck program on KZBI Radio.